Great. So the question is, once you've invested, how much involvement do you have in the company? Referencing the business model is usually not right when it comes in. So around the business model, I guess, how much involvement do you have in the changing of that business model?
Okay, so like I said earlier, the only thing we know is that the plan is probably wrong. Okay, so what we're interested in is walking the journey with the entrepreneur. Because what we do is we never invest enough money for the business to become profitable in one step. So we always put a little bit of money in because that helps us manage our risk at the beginning. But that's never enough to get the company usually to profitability. So that means the entrepreneur has to come back to us to ask for more. And we are expecting to give more. But in order for us to make that decision appropriately, should we be investing more or not, we need to know everything that's happened in the business. So as a consequence, we try and get really close. Now, we don't try and force ourselves onto the entrepreneur, but we generally look for entrepreneurs who wants to have a dialogue with us. The truth is, if we said, you were going to grow from 1 to 100 in the next year and you grew from 1 to 50, that might be, if we hadn't been talking to you, that might have been an argument for not investing because you'd only hit half the target. But actually, if we'd realized that along the way you learned this and you learned that and you learned the other about your market, and actually we were pointing in the wrong direction, so we should have been pointing in this direction, we might invest even though you only got to 50 when you'd said you'd get to 100. Do you see what I mean? So that's where the communication becomes very important. So we'd like to stay very close, which is why we are in the region. Bethel, my colleague, is here, and Muna in Addis. I'm in Nairobi. We're not flying in and out from some long distance away because we want that proximity. We want to hang out with you so that we know we can make the best possible judgment call about whether we should continue to invest and support you. So it's not a formula. And sometimes, we're not going to claim we know everything about permaculture in the case of GreenPath. But what we've probably seen in 14 other companies in our portfolio is similar problems on how to hire talent, how to deal with this bit of red tape. So we can add more generic business value just because we've seen it elsewhere. So we're not claiming when we come in that we know it all, but what we do is we share whatever information seems relevant for that company at that particular point in its life cycle.
Great. So social return is sexy in theory, but in practice, it can be costly. So Andrew, what is your view on the actual social return?
And I really appreciate that question because you're right. There's lots of people talking big about achieving social impact and not many people who've figured out really what that looks like. So what we have is when we make an investment, before we make investment, we apply a filter, which is a decision essentially, which says, if we believe that this business has complete alignment between its commercial objectives and its social objectives, then we will invest. If it doesn't have any social objectives, or there is not alignment, we will not invest. So what we do is we have a baked-in rule before we even write the first check, which is you, the entrepreneur, tell us what the impact is going to, the social benefit is going to be. What is it? Is it employment? Is it carbon emissions saved? Is it small-scale farmers given access to markets? What is the measure? You tell us. We're not going to tell you. Then we decide if we believe that's a valuable enough social impact. If it is, the next question is, will the commercial success of this business and its social impact grow totally in parallel? Because if you're forced to decide between one or the other, you get into all sorts of trouble, because you're forced to choose between financial return and social return. We never want to be in that position. So we just don't invest unless we believe the two are totally combined and aligned. Does that answer your question? We then measure it hugely. All our investors are governments. I mean, they measure everything. So, how many women, how many children, how many males, how many females, are they rural, are they peri-urban? We have to measure everything, and we report on it quarterly. And I can tell you, I have had 2.67 million beneficiaries in one form or another from all the businesses I've invested in only 4 years. And that's because I'm measuring it. Now, that will have expression in all sorts of different ways. Kids getting access to better academic outcomes, people who are off the grid getting access to power, people getting employment, SOCO providing artisans in the slums with access to market, GreenPath providing small-scale farmers with access to market. So the impact that we measure, the social benefit we measure, is different in every company's case, but we always measure it, and we always make sure it's aligned with the commercial objectives.
Brilliant. Brilliant, man. 2.6 million. I think we can just float over that as like a number, but that's actually a game changer. Yeah, that is actually a game changer. And I think that is one of the reasons why we're so excited about fueling entrepreneurship and business, because this is the answer to many of our social problems today. And so I really want that to be an inspiration. I think we are running out of time, but we will make space for one more question here. I'm sure these guys will be on for a short time afterwards. Otherwise, they have email addresses, and I'm sure they're happy to, or one of their team, to answer questions if they come.
If you're a rock star entrepreneur.
Okay, let's just hear it over here. Great. So the question is around when it comes to education. Our sister here believes it should be something that is headed up by the public sector. There's a slight nervousness that a private sector would come in and do it. And so, one, what angle do you take on that? And two, are you also investing in public sector stuff?
The second question I'll answer first. We can't invest in public sector stuff because it's public sector. But more importantly, you've hit on a really raw nerve. In many societies, there's a deep suspicion of private sector providing things which are seen as public goods, health, education, etc. And so we appreciate that sensitivity. The issue is, however, I can tell you that Kenya, teacher absenteeism in the public education is 48%. Teachers don't turn up half the time. Also, the average bribe paid per child per month is $5. So this so-called free education, which everybody loves to hold up as the paradigm of virtue, is very often pretty broken. So that, in that case, what we say is we're not trying to squeeze out public, we're trying to give parents a choice. So nobody's going to force them to go to a private school. They'll just choose, they vote with their feet. They'll go to the school that gives them what they want. Secondly, the brilliant thing, and I'm really excited about this, about Bridge International Academies, which is in the education sector, is that having proved that they can deliver better academic outcomes at a lower price than the state can, more efficiently, what's happening now is the state is saying, do you know what, Bridge, could you come and tell us how to run our public schools? So they're beginning to contract with Bridge, and they're making it free at the point of consumption for the child. So instead of being a private school, it's basically a public school, but it's being run with all the disciplines and efficiencies of a private system. So we will definitely work with governments where they're willing to adapt and make changes. But where they are not, we are not prepared to stand by and let hundreds of thousands of kids be condemned to a bad education just because we have an ideology that says it has to be public rather than private sector. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think it does. So just as we come to a close, we tend to do this with our entrepreneurs, which is set the context, which is there is a bunch of people in this room at some stage along the entrepreneurial journey, predominantly pre-startup stage. If you could say one thing to them around what they're doing and inspire them, what would it be? These guys have the potential to create these businesses you're talking about, to employ hundreds of thousands of people. And so if given the opportunity to say one thing, and people watching online as well, thinking about whether they start a business or not, each of you, what one thing would you say?
I think of all the many things I would want to say to you, I think number one is make sure you start your business for all the right reasons. Make sure that your motivation, your own life's purpose is aligned with the purpose of your business. If it is, your likelihood of succeeding is far, far greater than if you'd not actually made that consideration.
I'd say really be honest with yourself. If you're going to build a business, you are going to have to make huge sacrifices. If you're not prepared to do that, don't even begin. But if you are prepared to do it, the sky is the limit. But it will only come with a huge amount of work. So don't do it, as John says, unless you are passionate about it. So don't do it for the money. Honestly, I'm saying that as a financial investor. Don't do it for the money. Do it because you really believe there is a big need, a big social need that can be solved sustainably through enterprise, and then you'll have the passion to carry you through what will inevitably be some really hard, rocky bits on the journey.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it for these two unbelievably wise men?